Hi everyone, welcome to our lecture for week 3. In this lecture, we're going to be going through a little bit of an extra addition that's not inside of the lecture notes per se. Please review these with the exceptions. The next video after this one talks about custom exceptions and implementing them. But what I want to do is do something similar to what this Q is doing. We're implementing our own abstract data type class, and this is going to be helpful for returning an object that we can iterate through inside of Python for your assignment 3. So what I'll do is I'll actually incrementally build this out together. And essentially what the general concept of what we're looking for is that we want to implement an object. And then we're going to create an object manager. Now, this isn't an actual term inside of computer science or anything. You can call this an object ADT, something that holds together the data of that object for us. But essentially, what we would like to do is maybe I'll create a class of humans, and then I'll create like a human container that we can iterate through them with. We did this last week with overriding the iter method, and we'll be doing that today during this lecture as well. So to go ahead and get started, I'm going to go ahead and create, let's go ahead and create an object called dog. And it's going to be our base object that we're working with. And let's say that every dog object has a self that we create here. This is our constructor, as we remember. And what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and say the name of the dog, so self.name. And then I also want to create maybe the fur color of the dog. So self.fur color. And then maybe to make it even more interesting, let's do age. So my dog is going to have 3 attributes: their name, their fur color, and their age. And because I have these guys, I'm going to go ahead and just create parameters that bring in each of these. I'll default it to my dog's information here. So brown. Let me actually full screen this for us as well. So it'll be a brown fur color. And then age would be the 8. Cool. So now, per our general discussions here, we're going to set each of our attributes of our class here to the parameters that I brought in. And if I don't want to use any built-in ones, I'll just use the ones here. I can go ahead and create this dog object to either bring back items or not. Now, we usually use setters and getters. So setters would set each of these to these logical things. So again, if you bring in something like set age to something, that would do it for us. What I want to do is just use the getters for the time being, just to make sure that everyone understands the example. So to go ahead and create a function of getting, I'm just going to go ahead and get name, like so. And because I want to make sure that each instance of this object is unique, I need to provide the self parameter in here so Python knows how to differentiate between my dog objects. And I'm going to simply return self.name. Now I'll go ahead and create the fur color as well. We did this before too. If I'll create the fur color, I'm going to return the fur color, and then I'll go ahead and get the age. And then I'll return self.get, or self.age. Nice. So these are my getters. My setters, again, would set each of these to their individual instances. Let's just do one really quick for set name. And now again, if I'm taking in a setter, I need to provide a name in my parameter to set it to. And once I do that, I'll say something like self.name equal to name, which is the parameter that's here. So this instance of name is only up here. It's not referencing up here because this is a new namespace that we're looking at, so Python doesn't get confused for us, okay? So very basic class of our setters and getters. These are all built in. I want to go ahead and just remind us of how to do, let me bring this up in my screen a little bit more here for us, to just overload operations. So again, whenever we're overloading anything in Python, we're going to be using those double underscores. And what I want to overload is just a string representation. Again, the str is what happens when we call print. So whenever we call print, it actually calls this method called str inside of Python, and that will return something for us here. And I'll say this is a dog called with this type of fur and is this years old, something like that. And I'll format this by referencing each of my names up there. So again, I will say self.name, self.fur color, and then self.age. Okay. Now, if this is going pretty fast and you're a bit confused by everything, go ahead and just try to copy it down and maybe remove all of these here. if you're a bit confused about how we're calling these together. But again, the general idea is that this self.name attribute is now referenced throughout the entire namespace. I don't want to use something like name because name doesn't occur in my parameter list, and Python isn't smart enough to go up here and say, well, maybe name is like this. So what we need to do is make sure we attribute the attribute name to it. So go ahead and mess around with that a little bit if you'd like. And what I could do now is I'm actually going to go ahead and try to do a little bit more of an experiment with creating this method that brings in items from a file. So what I'll do for us inside of my, I believe this is saved onto my desktop really quick. See here, yep. So my test is on my desktop. I'm going to go ahead and make a new text document. I'm going to call this dogs.txt. Now, again, you're provided all these during the homeworks and the quizzes, or excuse me, during the midterm and final, but go ahead and experiment with making these just so you get the hang of it. And now, based on what we know here, I'm going to go ahead and create an item. Let's say that we have a dog named Rose, gold fur color is 5. Let's do dicey, brown 15. Let's see here. It's another dog name. Maybe something like Madra. This is black. And 9. Cool. So now I've created 3 different types of dogs here inside of my txt file. And what I want to do is I want to see if I can actually get my code to run this guy. So I have my class of dog created. Let's see if it works out for me. So d is equal to new dog. D dot print D. Yeah, nice. So this is looking out okay. What if I do is equal to dog rose gray 10 print D. This dog called Rose with gray fur and it's 10 years old. Okay, so it's looking okay for us right now. What I want to do is create this method inside of my item here that we usually brings in objects for us and creates it. So we did this last week. So I'm going to go ahead and do here is def load dogs. And what this method will do is it's going to take in a file name. Now, again, we're going to try to do a try and accept here just to make sure it works out perfectly. I'm going to keep this as a general accept. Again, if you want to bet specific about IO errors or found not found, that's good too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say f is equal to open file name. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say content is equal to f.read. And let me just basically print out the content. And if there's any exception that occurs, I'm just going to call it error like this. So just a general error that happens. And then what I'll do is I'm going to call load dogs on my dogs.txt file that I created here. Okay. So great. So I'm actually able to load in the information from here. Okay, everyone, so now I'm printing out my content, okay? We can see that each of them are there. And in this next portion, you're going to be asked to, what I want to do is just try to automate this process of loading in these dogs and creating objects with them. And what we could do here is actually go ahead and try to say something like content is equal to, and you'll notice here that when I use the f.read, we'll try to encounter an error here if I'm using f.read. Content.split. Let's see here. And we'll see here that whenever you use read, you kind of encounter this scenario where you get everything at once. So usually as a good practice, if we're making objects based off of reading in things, it might be easier for us to use f is equal to read lines, okay? And the reason why we want to use these read lines things is that each object that we create or each bit of information that we need for our object is set into an individual instance of a list item. So our first object is at index 0, our second object is at index 1, our third object is at index 2, excuse me. So what we could do now with this logic is I can actually go ahead and say for something like for dog item in content, I could say print dog item. And we'll see here that now I'm actually getting each individual instance of these objects individual. But again, this doesn't help us too much because we might be thinking, let me go ahead and say, I want the name of my dog. It's at index 0. What you'll actually get is just the first index 0 of this entire string. Because the type of all these guys is a string object, which isn't what we want. So what we want to do instead here is where we can actually go ahead and split. Now, what do we want to split? Hey, let me actually flip around what these two guys are doing here. We'll notice that I want to split by, if I'm splitting normally, it's okay looking, but if I have this object, I have a comma in here, that's not the best for me. So what I can do is, instead of splitting by normal means, I can split my comma. And when I split by my comma, we'll see that I also have each of these guys individual. Now I get this issue with this /n that's right there. So what we can also try to do is, before I print it out, I can try to strip it of any information that's remaining, okay? It looks like I'm getting an error here because I'm making them into a list based on my split method. So what I'll try to do is actually strip them before I split them. And you'll notice here, if I strip before I split, I have a bit of a space in front of it, but it's fine. There's no more comma there. So Python removed it. Okay. So that's what the strip method does. It removes any /n's in our code. And then the split method will split and remove any of the commas that we see. Now, why is this important for us? Well, we now have this list object. Index 0 gives me the name. Index 1 gives me the fur color. Index 2 gives me the age. So what I could say here is something like this. Dog name is equal to dog item at index 0. And as good practice, just to get into the habit of it, I'm going to cast all these into their specific string instances for their specific types, because I want to make sure that all of my logic later on doesn't encounter an issue. And essentially, if I went ahead and said, if I add up 2 dog objects, and I'll do that again for us here underneath this definition, I want to make sure I can cast the dog item object into an integer, because I might be doing something with my dog age that only an integer can do. So you have to make sure that you're casting them properly when you're creating these objects like this, okay? So now what do I do with all this information? Well, I could say new dog is equal to dog object, and I'm going to give it a dog name, dog fur color, dog age. Now, based on your homework and what you did too, this load dogs file did something where we created a list object like so. And then what we did down here is most likely .append. If you did it a different way, that's fine, but as long as you got this back, it should be good. And after I went ahead and ran it, it looks like it ran okay. I didn't get any error. After I did all this information, what I did is, outside of my for loop, I returned all dogs. Okay. So now if I do a is equal to load dogs.txt, for item in a, print a, we'll see here, looks like I'm getting all these pieces of information back. Looks like I'm not getting anything that I expected back though. And it's weird, right? Because I wanted to make sure that my print statement worked. But it looks like what's happening is that I didn't override my representation method. So what I could do here, again, I'm being a little lazy. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this guy down here. Let's see if this does it for us. For item in A, print A. Cool. Looks like this is working for us, okay? So it looks like it's printing out each of my items. And it looks like when I just printed out A by itself, it went ahead and just did it normally here.